Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global Sovereign AI Opportunity webinar. I'm Hilary Carter, SVP of Research at the Linux Foundation, and I'm excited to be your host and moderator for today's discussion. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us today, including and especially our expert speakers. Today, we're joined by Vincent Caldera, CTO of Red Hat APAC, Mark Lejour, FinTech Innovation Lead at Exion, Jerry Cuomo, IBM Fellow and author of the Think book series, which includes titles Think Blockchain and Think Artificial Intelligence, and Eugene Chea, CEO at Featherless AI and co-lead for the RWKV project under the Linux Foundation. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you're watching this webinar on LinkedIn, feel free to drop your questions in the comments section. If you're joining us on Zoom, all attendees are muted by default, but you can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the webinar, we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. This is an official webinar of the Linux Foundation, and all participants are expected to follow our code of conduct. Please be respectful and avoid posting anything in the Q&A that violates these guidelines. We'll share a link to that code of conduct in the chat. Finally, today's session is being recorded and it will be shared on the LF AI and Data YouTube channel and posted on the webinar page following the event. We'll be following this webinar series with a survey on sovereign AI, the Global AI Strategy Survey. So please, if you subscribe to Linux Foundation Research or the LF AI and Data Foundation newsletter, you'll receive the survey in future correspondence. And you can also get research right into your inbox. So check the chat for links and stay engaged with our research process. And so with that, it's time to dig into our topic. We're here today because as generative AI is rapidly changing our world, it's apparent that it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. For AI solutions to truly drive innovation and GDP growth for different organizations and countries in different regions of the world, they require models that embed culture and context and values and new levels of customization and specificity around industry-specific regulations and language and so on. But in short, that countries need their own AI strategy, regions need their own AI strategy, and companies too need their own AI strategy. To execute this vision, open source software, open source projects, and open source governance principles are a vital part of realizing the promise of sovereign AI. And that's our hypothesis today. So we look forward to our panelists pressure testing the assumptions that I've just made, and we hope that our viewers will share your unique experiences too. So let's dig into the phenomenon of sovereign AI. So to our panelists, what's going on? Is sovereign AI a thing? Do you have examples of sovereign AI in development? What do you think about the statements that I just made? What's the opportunity here? And Jerry, let me start with you because you and I have had some interesting conversations on the subject before.
Yeah, so thanks, Hilary. Hello, everyone. I'm Jerry. And I guess what I'd say is I think it's a great idea, the notion of sovereign AI. I would like to suggest like a North Star to frame this and frame the usage of this in context. In my opinion, a gold star that we all know and love is the internet. So the internet serves the entire world, yet it adapts to local laws, language, and cultures and things like that. So why? Again, I'm an engineer at heart. So because it's built on strong, flexible standards, right? That the foundation allows it to scale globally and support local needs. But yet there is no sovereign internet, right? There is no fragmentation into separate sovereign interests. So the foundation is strong enough, flexible enough to support the local needs. And I think that's a great thing that we can strive for here. And in doing so, if we're lucky, and I think we will, this becomes a pressure test. The notion of sovereign targeting AI for the local needs becomes a pressure test for AI, but without forking AI, right? With evolving AI. And of course, we're not here randomly. We all believe open source plays a big role in this. So that's what I'll say initially. So sovereign AI for everyone, just like the internet's for everyone.
Yeah, you bet. And recently, I mean, just last week, in a podcast with A16Z, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO, and Mistral CEO Arthur Mensch sat down for an hour-long conversation whereby they began describing AI as a general purpose technology and likened it very much to the internet. Not to use it would be the equivalent of not using the internet today. So I appreciate that, Jerry, where we are is like, it's kind of a baseline. Mark, you're doing some amazing work both in Canada and in Europe. Tell us what's happening in your world on this important topic.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for having me today, and it's a privilege to share the stage with everyone here. So just a quick word about my perspective here. Exion, we are a very small startup, founded about 5 years ago with initial investment from EDF Group, a very large group, the largest utility group in company in Europe. And our mission is to focus on high performance computing. When AI is obviously very top, we've been working with EDF, but also other external clients, top tier 1 banks, large companies, to help them figure this out. On the AI front, our customers, they're very interested in securing their data. So if you think about electrical grids, if you think about large companies like, for example, pharma, they have very precious intellectual property. We also certify TPN Gold, for example, as a cloud provider for movie studios, video gaming companies. So when you have very, very expensive, very precious data or intellectual property, suddenly the companies, they're starting to think, oh, how do I protect my data? How do I make sure it stays within the world of, the firewall? How can I make sure I'm the only one who can actually monetize that data? So our mission has been, as much as providing compute, is to make sure that the data is protecting from end to end, from the data collection down to the exploitation of the data, and to eventually the disposal of the data. So it's been a lot of and open source plays a big role in there, obviously, and I'm sure we'll get to that very soon.
That's great. Yeah, I look forward to hearing the types of open source projects and the kinds of communities that you're engaging in to be able to deliver on this innovation mandate, Mark. Eugene, tell us what you're seeing out there in terms of open source and sovereign AI. What's the big picture?
So yeah, a bit of background for me as well. I'm Eugene, and one of the big projects that I lead is the RWKV open source project under the Linux Foundation, with the goal of making AI accessible to everyone, regardless of language, nation, or compute. So we specifically design our models to be an alternative to Transformer, where it scales linearly, making it 100 to 1,000x cheaper, while also specifically training it on 100+ language. And this allows the models to be used in, let's say, like lower end compute in various areas where existing models do not even do not cover. Separately, I run Featherless AI, as you introduced, and we actually use some of the learnings and the technologies that we work on the open source project to actually run any Hugging Face model, over thousands of them, with an instant access, a single subscription plan. And this provides us a very unique lens on both sides. So the way I view sovereign AI, right, is actually more like an onion in layers. It's like for example, when I visited my family back in my grandparents in Malaysia, and I showed them about AI, they were like, "Yeah, this is cool and all, but it doesn't speak Malay." and that was the barrier number one. So like as low as it sounds like, right, language is the first barrier, and it's part of the sovereignty. And while there has been many attempts, be it from the team at Google and OpenAI to actually teach models more languages, this is where the aspect of cultural nuances and things starts to fall apart as well, because a lot of these data sets, to put it very frankly, are prepared by American teams without full collaboration with the local teams. So it kind of the next feedback, the next iteration will be like, it kind of sounds very robotic or like the government, because it's very formal text. And there are many countries where it's very different. Like, for example, if you ever interact with Japan Twitter or Japan Internet, it is like EXIF is another language compared to their official Japanese. And that is like the first barrier. The second barrier subsequently, right, is then like the concerns around privacy laws. So this is where countries starts to like, I want to deploy my own data centers. I want to deploy my AI within my premise. I don't want my medical data, let's say I'm a hospital using this AI model, to be leaked beyond. Then after that, the third barrier is like, how do I customize it for more like my own country's views or my own sovereignty views, and not to be influenced by external sovereignty views? Because all these models have, and it's a rather sensitive topic, but we can't really fully avoid it, have political alignments that sometimes is against the country that wanted to use it, even though the models are open weights. So there's interest to like fine tune it with more specific nuances. I like to use less politically sensitive examples. Like, for example, Singapore and Malaysia, we disagree on who invented chicken rice and chili crab. and we are both friendly neighbors, but there are things that we disagree on, and these are things that are sometimes like aligned even on the AI model. But you can imagine a much more serious example, respectively. So those are the way I view the layers of sovereignty, and we see it being happen even on our models or even on the Llama models fine-tuned. Like, and that's how the individual countries embrace it. Like, for example, on Federalist, right, I like to say this one. My favorite model was actually this one model where 5 construction companies came together to fine-tune a Korean model that is based on the Health and Safety Construction Bureau guidelines for Korea, so that they can, and so that their contractors can ask it questions. And I'm like, none of us will ever need this except for these 5 companies or maybe 10 companies in Korea. And in the first place, they also needed to, because Llama didn't support Korean, they actually fine-tune it from a Korean Llama model. And that is like literally an example of sovereign AI playing out both at the language level, and then because these companies are rather sensitive about their data, at the privacy level, and then subsequently at the needs level.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. And it speaks to other aspects of open source where collaboration around a need, like mutualizing the costs of regulatory compliance, bring competitor organizations to the table. I'm thrilled to hear about this example in Korea. It's a fantastic example of open collaboration within an industry around a technology that everybody needs and sees the value of. Great example, Eugene. Thank you. Vincent, you have a lot to say on the topic. You published an amazing article on LinkedIn, which was a terrific context setting piece. I'm sure we'll be sharing that momentarily, but let's hear more from you on what's happening from your point of view at Red Hat.
Yeah, so I'll probably want to bring a complementary view to what we've heard, right? So at Red Hat, of course, we are more of an open source platform company. And so I really like the image of the internet, but I need to bring a bit of caution in using this image in the world of AI for a very specific reason. The big difference with AI right now is there is a big dependency on hardware and compute. And access to computing resource to actually drive, use case in AI. You can today build a frontier model if you are outside of a mature country like United States, or a few other companies like maybe France, China, would not actually have enough hardware and compute to actually do this. The access to compute is also restricted by geographical considerations. There are export controls now for the high-end NVIDIA accelerator going to countries like China. as an example. And then we, as a technology provider, we have seen a huge, focus on countries to build their digital autonomy on the hardware. And so that means essentially building their own compute data center of private AI to make sure that they have enough capacity to support their critical businesses, right? The idea is look at all your critical infrastructure, banking, public services, and so on. If they start to build AI in their own services, and if tomorrow you cannot get enough access to the new chips, then you are in big trouble. So we've seen a huge amount of data center building. I think a very good example in APAC is India, which essentially the Ministry of Electronics has this initiative called India AI, which is looking at building a GPU capacity at a very affordable cost for Indian businesses and delivered by Indian data center and provider. So this is an example. The other one I would give is on the supply chain dependency. We are seeing countries like Korea, China, Japan to some extent, also looking at building their own chipset to progressively reduce the dependency on a foreign hardware provider. So that's another, I would say, different angle. And what's interesting is we see a huge dependency in the ability to drive and participate in the AI boom by the access to compute. And also ultimately what is starting to materialize is the access to energy. So if you've looked at, for example, what some of the providers like OpenAI and so on are saying, is essentially now their ability to produce new AI capability is no more only limited by the compute, but by the access to electric power to actually bring into their data center to actually run those big farms. So you are going to see as well a big energy crisis potentially forming to actually plug all those fancy data center and accelerator into enough electric current. So that's a totally different angle, but we kind of, I've been doing a lot of work on essentially helping people to build private AI data center, but also optimizing their sustainability capability. So really reduce the amount of energy that is consumed to either tune AI model or to provide just inference.
Yeah, good points. Does anyone want to add before we go on? Jerry, go for it.
Yeah, I got a dog barking if you can hear it in the background. So maybe I'll hold my comments if it's annoying.
Okay, sure. Yes. I know the feeling.
Yeah, he's stopping now. No, so I agree completely with Vincent. Where we are today, there is bias for who can afford to train AI. But let's open the lens and look down the road 3-5 years. I mean, one thing we know from technology is it doesn't sit still. It becomes smaller, faster, sharper, etc. So is that a case of is that going to be a problem 3, 4, 5, 7 years from now? I think not. I think, in fact, we're already seeing today is people just have to kind of, observe the quick moving landscape. Techniques like quantizing and, mixture of experts. And there are so many techniques out there to make AI run on mobile chips, just like blockchain. Blockchain and crypto took, huge data centers, made NVIDIA rich, and AI is making them richer. But it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, blockchain, you can run it on on your phone right now, right? These algorithms change very quickly. So as we look for this, yes, we have to accept where we are, but we shouldn't overly design for those because the world is, the sand is shifting underneath us. So I think that's one thing. I agree with Vincent, but if we look ahead a little bit, maybe that won't be a big a deal. It is a big deal today, no doubt about it.
Any follow-ons?
I view it as a transitionary phase, because alluding back to what I say about language and then subsequently running it and then personalizing it respectively, right? Is that the compute demands, right? There are different stages in creating a model. And this speaking as a model creator, there is one that's creating the foundational model. That is the biggest high intensity, all your GPUs in one data center creation phase. Then subsequently, the next phase, it would be the fine-tuning for, let's say, a language, or fine-tuning for more specific use cases. That require typically anywhere from 8, people run 8 or 16 nodes. We're not talking about the 1,000 node or 10,000 node supercluster. We're talking about 8 to 16 H100 nodes, which is still very expensive. Mind you, one of these machines costs $300,000, and 16 of them is still a multi-million-dollar purchase, but it's still much more accessible, respectively, and it's something that you could rent from the cloud. Right? Then subsequently, the further phases would be like where you do more specific fine-tune, which sometimes people even get away with 1-2 nodes. And for inference, you don't need a cluster. You just need individual nodes. And that can happen in a more distributed nature as well. Like, for example, like I think recently we've been seeing a lot of movement, like people, for example, running even the biggest model, like DeepSeek R1, on 4 Mac Minis stacked up together. Or alternatively, NVIDIA and a few other suppliers are launching digits, which is still something like Mac Mini. Like, there's going to be more newer means to run these models in an inference and distributed way that doesn't require giant data centers. So that's what I mean by, I view it as a transition statement, because for us, right, and the reason why we train very specifically on 100 languages, with the goal of eventually covering 200 languages, which is all the major languages for every country, which is still a far cry from like 800 plus dialects that the world have, is that we want to ensure that everyone, regardless of what country you're at, is that your country's primary language is covered. And that allows you to use AI for economical benefit. And this will also mean that your country do not need to train the base model completely from scratch, because that is the high intensity, high cost phase. And you will only need to like add in to like refine the model for your use case, which is a much more smaller capacity. And then when you want to do inference, you still use the high-end machines, but you could also like start using the newer lower end machines that are more distributed in nature.
And I'd like to add just something else on the radar, because I think Vincent mentioned some of the constraints, access to hardware, access to electricity is another big one, definitely. And you'll see, I mean, some companies are actually out there doing arbitrage on electricity. The other big piece is the carbon footprint, right? Because all these AI compute, I mean, I was just reading reports, the FANG, the GAFAM, as they said in France, I mean, the major IT companies, hyperscalers, they grew their carbon footprint by 30 to 50%, I heard. So as you extend the compute, of course, there is also some impact on the environment. So that's the other thing that we're working on right now, to try to aim to have the lowest carbon footprint in industry. I think right now we are at 38 gram per kilowatt hour. By recycling, by reusing the fatal heat at the back of the data center, lowering our footprint I think it's going to be a little bit a bit of a challenge. And I've seen, and by the way, I mean, a lot of these companies, you're probably seeing there, the Microsoft, a good example, they bought a nuclear site, 3 Mile Island, right? That was had the bad rep, so they're revamping that one. Kraken, they're just buying their own nuclear site. So I've seen a couple of projects, like massive projects. They're building their own energy right now. So it's a whole stack. I think we might, and actually very fascinating about the convergence of these technologies.
So yeah, I hear that I'm hearing, and what you're saying around barriers to access is a challenge that organizations and companies, governments, regions have to come to terms with. I am seeing examples in open source where there's mass collaboration around some of these issues to gain efficiencies in among the hyperscalers and the development of chip capabilities and high performance computing and collaborating around green software and other types of efficient computing solutions. And so I'm hopeful that, open source models of collaboration can help us collectively overcome these challenges so we don't have siloed operations. But I'd be interested to hear what this group is experiencing around the ways that open source projects in particular are making sovereign AI more accessible, more feasible, and what the main value drivers are. Do organizations need to know more about open source projects that are going to facilitate these objectives? Vincent, what is your experience around the role of open source and the extent to which organizations are really leveraging it here?
Well, my experience is the sheer amount of innovation you see today in AI, and in particular generative AI, is entirely almost dependent on open source technology. I think if you look at GitHub today, probably 1/3 of projects are almost entirely exclusively focused on Gen AI. And part and parcel of this is, if you look at some of the key libraries that typically a data scientist or an engineer needs to use these days to train or tune a model, you will find projects like PyTorch, which probably is 90+% of Gen AI model trained today use PyTorch as a library. It's open source. If you're only talking about enterprise doing tuning, I mean, you will have libraries like transformers and parameters efficient fine tuning from Hugging Face, which are very kind of centralized, very efficient method of taking any open weight model, such as a Llama or a QN or a DeepSeek model, and just spending a little bit of compute to tune to the data and the skills that you want the model to get. All those libraries that fundamentally people have been using for kind of use case driven AI, they are pretty much open source tooling out there. So it's almost impossible to do AI today without actually using some of this open source technology. I mean, you would have to spend a lot of time and finding proprietary technology and make it happen. I don't think it's possible anymore.
Yeah, Vincent, I have to agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm blown away. And I kind of am an adjunct at North Carolina State University. I teach trustworthy AI and blockchain, and students have zero toleration for fee-based access to software, et cetera. Hugging Face has been a godsend. Just the variety of technology, open technology, open models, et cetera, et cetera. Pairing it with something like a Google Colab is an educator's dream at getting access to these notebooks and et cetera. And just case in point, when you think about trustworthy AI in the sovereign kind of, with the sovereign overlay thought, like we've been experimenting with creating deep fakes such that we can detect deep fakes, and the access, like just to clone your voice, is just trivial to do. Like in an afternoon, you can clone your own voice, which is scary, but let's not fear the unknown. Let's learn about the unknown so that we can mitigate. And I think that pattern is critical for sovereign thoughts. But without open technology, how can you experiment? How can you teach? How can you learn, right? And I think that is a huge contribution to humankind. Open projects like that, and accessible through marketplaces or hubs like Hugging Face.
No, there is no question about it. I've been in open source for about like 25 years. I've seen this story over and over and over in every single domain. I mean, Linux, people were making eyes, and now it's pretty much everywhere. It's in phones, space stations, movies, data centers, pretty much. There is another interesting, you mentioned, Hilary, a YouTube video with Jensen Huang. There is another that I'm actually showing my students. I'm teaching strategy at the MBA. I actually have a little bit of a session open source there because they need to understand how that plays out. There is these fascinating conversations between Jensen Huang and and Mark Zuckerberg for Meta. Meta has been doing a lot on open source, both on the from the hardware, top of the chain, and Llama is still a really big thing right now in AI. And Yann Lequin has a very strong view also on open source AI. So I mean, we don't have enough time, but I think the la messe a été dite, as I say in French. I mean, I think open source has won, and period. Can refer to other stories. If you want to catch up as a country, as a company, if you have a chance, if you want a chance to catch up, you don't have a choice. You have to keep collaborating. You have to keep rubbing elbow. You have to keep sharing things. You have to keep just seeing what others are doing and pushing the boundaries of it. That's the only way you can catch up. And it's not getting slower, is getting faster.
Yeah. Eugene, I'll come to you in a minute, but I did want to say that some of the objections that I hear around open source and really understanding its utility comes down to, well, what about IP and what about patents and innovation? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there around the fact that open source is the pre-competitive layer and that the IP is the differentiative layer. And there's just not enough broad-based understanding of how you can actually have both. You can have a successful commercial operation and a product, and you can get to that product to market faster if you're leveraging open source.
Yeah, I mean, just very quick on that, just 1000% agree. I mean, IBM, you remember Watson and Jeopardy and our initial forays into health and all of that. And it boomed, back in the early 2000s, but then it hit a rock wall. And as we could not move faster than the expectations to evolve the technology in a proprietary way. Now, with our new take, thanks to our friends at Red Hat, with Watson X, Granite, and all the things we're doing, we made a huge Linux-like pivot, like we did with our operating systems, et cetera, to open source AI as our way of commercializing. And we do a huge amount of patents. We do all of that, but it's layered very neatly. The beautiful thing about the Linux kernel as an exemplar is it is so layered and stacked that you can compete. You can plug in your innovation at any level and profit from building around that open source ecosystem. So absolutely, the two coexist very well.
Thanks for making that point, Jerry. Eugene, what are the tools? Obviously, you have a very important role at RWKV. What can you say about open source tooling as it relates to accelerating sovereign AI?
No, I think it's as multiple speakers have shared. The tooling has already been put in place that in various in such a way, like pretty much every model in some shape and form is now being built on PyTorch, another Linux Foundation project as well. And we build these things on PyTorch, and most of us still dominantly use, for example, NVIDIA hardware. If you code it respectively with, let's say, the Triton kernel, which is another open project, you can run these models on the AMD hardware and even, let's just say, even non-GPU hardware. So for example, we have tested like AWS Inferentia and Trainium, and I won't be surprised Cerebras and Grok will work with PyTorch at some point as well. So it's like the idea of like being able to code your models, and at the fundamental, AI models are actually very simple and elegant in code. Most AI models are, if you ignore trying to make it efficient, it's less than 300 lines of code in PyTorch. But the file ends up being 2,000 lines of code because certain lines of code, we wanted to make it run faster, cheaper, more efficient for specific hardware. And that is kind of like the beauty of it, because at the very core of it is less than 300 lines, and you can run it anywhere as long as you got PyTorch working. And this also speaks to distribution. So RWKV as a Linux Foundation project as well, like when we started, because we are trying to do an alternative to Transformer to show that there's a cheaper way to do so, and our biggest models until recently was 7B or 14 billion parameters. So nowhere close to GPT-3 class, 3.5 class. But enough to do basic translation. One of the news that completely caught us by surprise one day was that was our inference code being shipped with Windows 10 and Windows 11 for local Copilot. And we were like, we didn't even know about this. This was like, someone was reverse engineering Copilot, and then they reached out to us. They said, hey, do you know about this? Are you working in Microsoft? And we're like, we have no idea. And at the end of the day, it's because this is literally Apache 2 license stuff that then they subsequently use and deploy, and we suddenly had 1.5 billion deploys. And that's kind of like one of the strengths of open source, that being able to like amplify your impact and contributions. And it makes sense because like for example, we sometimes can talk about AI doing amazing feats of work, right? When I was at WTO, the number one topic is, can you just translate trade documents and improve trade coordination? That's it. It's a rather low-hanging fruit, but it's not a solved problem yet. And open source has been the driver to actually for the tools to for these kind of use cases. Yeah, I can further expand to like even more complicated use cases, but I sometimes think that a lot of us like to think about the biggest and flashiest ChatGPT like use cases, but when it comes to like the impact in the world, it's really the boring and simpler things that actually multiplies over like the millions of use cases.
Yeah, I think you wanted to also show some examples of open source projects. I mean, for example, we love OpenStack because we can reuse a lot of hardware. We can use hybrid environment, mix kind of technologies. We can cloudify an environment for our client. Down to Vincent's article, everything was mentioning that about sovereignty, but also operational efficiency is a key benefit of using open source. Then we can tweak our own, own recipe, and so kind of also there is some kind of ownership and the mastery that comes by developing, and playing with the technology. I also like Kubernetes. I mean, if you want to deploy any kind of environment these days, look around at what their names and look up what the licenses are. Most 99% is probably going to be open source. We love Mistral. We partner with Mistral on the project with a large group. I think I didn't see the press release, so it's going to be announced very soon. But we partner with Llama. We partner with these are some of the key things that we're using on the infrastructure side of things. I'm pretty sure there's many other examples.
Yeah, we recently at LF Research just published a study, an empirical study exploring the trends in generative AI and the convergence with cloud computing. And there were some very interesting findings around the role of Kubernetes in terms of developing AI product on cloud, deploying it in Kubernetes, the preference to open source technologies for creating trusted AI systems and AI models. I do want to put in a plug for Confidential Computing Consortium, which is an LF hosted project. Vincent, you're nodding. Are you familiar with the CCC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very promising technology. It's hard to, I would say, scale it at this point, but we see so much demand from especially government customer from my perspective in defense, healthcare. I've been already running kind of proof of concept, technical proof of concept of how do we secure AI workload, how do we secure obviously data systems, very importantly. And the key area of focus that people don't understand is obviously as an industry we've always secured data like very, very well, but we've always secured data where it's stored, and we've always secured data in an application when it's being accessed. But from a sovereignty angle, what your worry is to secure data when it's in use in a third-party infrastructure, such as a public or a private cloud, but you are basically not running this public or private cloud infrastructure. And the question is, what is your level of trust in the provider actually not being able to access your data and leak it, right? And I think until recently, there was a bit of a blind confidence in a lot of the global provider of infrastructure that they would actually not access or disclose the data. And a lot of this myth was dispelled when people realized that they could easily be compelled by their regulator in their home country to actually access and disclose it, right? And so that's a big problem from the industry perspective, because we are just at the tail end of this massive, unilateral IT strategy of moving everything to cloud. And now people realize they actually can't really secure the cloud so easily. So I expect confidential computing is going to have a lot of interest. The technology, obviously backed by the hardware provider, like Intel, NVIDIA, they need to provide this capability at the hardware level that we can use in an operating system like Red Hat to provide a secure enclave. The technology, the good news is it's there. The challenge though is, in order to operationalize it on distributed infrastructure, it's obviously a very complex operational problem. So that's what we are kind of working on right now with the, foundation like the Confidential Computing Foundation and a number of mostly public sector and as well some banking conglomerates are also very interested to invest in that type of technology.
Yeah, we'll keep a close watch on the Confidential Computing Consortium, its ability to secure data in use, increasingly relevant in an AI compute context. Mm-hmm. Speaking of data, let's talk about data sharing and the importance of data governance around these models. Who can I call on to start? Vincent, why don't you take a pass at this?
Yeah.
And go around.
Yeah, of course. I will start with maybe what I feel is really the fundamental problem, right? So I generally focus on the concept of trustworthiness of AI. I think it's the biggest problem that the industry hasn't solved by a long shot, and it's going to take years to actually build our capability and understanding of how do we make AI systems trusted. It's a fundamentally difficult problem. I think probably one of the top 2 problems for humanity to solve together with climate risk. I would probably put them together, like in top position. But so think about it. We've talked about open source, and one of the big advantages of the open source problem is the transparency in the supply chain. The fact that you publish the recipe, not just the code, but the recipe to take the code and turn it into software. And this perspective, this process makes it possible for a third party to audit and understand how a software is produced. So I think what is very important for the industry to do is to provide a similar capability for AI technology. If you take something like a model, one thing that irritates me is people arguing about open source model. Personally, I think the concept of open source model doesn't make sense at all. I think what makes sense is more what transparency do you have in the process of building a model? And then you need to go to the component level. You need to understand the data sets that are used. You need to understand, obviously the libraries, the training code, the tuning code, the evaluation code, the synthetic data that you use to tune your model or to evaluate some of the results. So I find certain frameworks very promising. And the one I would mention is the model openness framework under Linux Foundation AI and Data. I'm a big fan. I'm not doing this just to give you a plug. I'm a big fan of the model openness framework because in my view is the best fundamentally sound approach that I have seen to really approach the supply chain of AI at the component level and really create some kind of a disclosure and openness and trust around how models are actually built. So, one of my personal objectives this year is to actually look at how we operationalize the framework with open source tooling. And I think it's probably the step number 1 in creating trust in AI, right? There's obviously other aspects like bias and how you manage over, but starting with the supply chain is very, very critical.
Yeah, I agree with Vincent. If I can add, there's a few things when you think about AI as part of a supply chain. And that is, big black boxes never fly in a supply chain, right? You have to label those boxes. What are they comprised? And smaller boxes are usually more trustworthy than bigger boxes because you can only fit. So when you look at standards and projects that are coming along to support the notions of sovereign, right, which are going to need to have things wrapped in smaller packages, I believe, so that you can look at regulatory alignment. You can look at and train around cultural, linguistic relevance and things like that. So when you think about modular AI, being able to start small and then fine tune, right? There are key technologies like our Granite model in IBM uses LoRa technology and PEFT tuning, right? I think of it like as treating AI like they're M&Ms, right? You have your candy chocolate goodness in the middle, which is like the neural network. And then you have your candy coating shell around it, which is what is done later, right? You like the green one, you like the red one. Well, the green one is French, the red one is Spanish, et cetera. You can add those on to the fundamentals of language without retraining the whole thing. And that becomes more describable in a transparent way. Then you pair that with model cards, data cards, and then with an ecosystem, right, where you can do like Reddit. You thumb it up, it goes higher up the list. Things that are not documented well, they get thumbed down and they move down. So when you kind of look at the list, you're going to see naturally the cream rising to the top, right? So these, many eyes, the benefits of open governance drives this kind of behavior where good things, understandable things, and the smaller they are, the more incremental they are, the easier they understand. I'll thumb those up. I get it. Bigger black boxes, I'm not sure what that is. They'll go further down the list. So the cream will rise to the top if you pair this technology and these projects with the right governance along with it. And again, not to keep plugging the Linux Foundation. We're all, members in some shape, form, or size. That's one. When you talk about gold standards, that's amongst, the goldest of the gold standards in open governance.
Thanks, Jerry. We'll take that. Please do keep plugging it. Mark, what's going on in world of Ixion and data and governance from your perspective and the projects that you're working on? Is data sharing hard or easy? Is governance hard or easy?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're working with our private clients. Their focus is to keep their data private for the most. I mean, we're really dealing with the private part of the data. Although, I mean, typical clients that we have, they have their own sophistication around information policy, so they know what's public, medium sensitivity, private data. On the, to give you an example, I mean, we're also working on some European projects. There's been actually a lot of funding for AI explainability, for example, and we've been working on the data spaces. So the whole idea of you control your data and somehow you control who has access to your data. And for AI, you have basically a model where you get the AI to actually visit your data and to come back with information, but not really taking your data out. So you never really see the data, but you get to train the AI in that way. So we're also running validators with Pontus X and in the Gaia X also ecosystem, which allows, for example, the Library of Berlin is on the network to basically kind of monetize their documents and everything. So that's been one of the complaints from libraries in particular, but anyone that owns cultural artifacts, they invested a lot of money in those. And then you have the AI builders scrapping the internet and taking that and basically taking it away, and you never see your money back. I'm currently working with some researchers that are thinking, well, can we have a more virtuous world where maybe you can take the data, but then send me some money back if it's successful, right? And open source and blockchain is part of the answer there.
We have a data sharing project, a license, community data license agreement, version 2.0 that I would encourage folks to familiarize themselves with. It's the license under which we publish data at Linux Foundation Research, our survey data that's free of personally identifiable information to encourage innovation and collaboration. And so for folks who are looking for a framework, I'd point them to that particular project. Eugene, what are your thoughts on this aspect of sovereign AI?
So when it comes to data, our group takes a particularly slightly different stance, mostly because our end goal would be to be that base model that all other groups will be able to build on top of. So we put ourselves to a much stricter standard. So we're talking about clean, open data, and for us, our view is that we're not trying to be the best model on earth. We want to be the most diverse in terms of language, and we want to be we want to bring up the floor, and that is something that subsequently other groups will then be able to take our models to fine tune on, possibly with the proprietary data, with data exchange agreements for their respective country or region. And so for us, it's always been about more towards open data access, and what can be cleanly licensed from the web or from other sources. I understand that this is not a particularly popular stance among most model creators because there is a simplicity, and it's a perpetual internal debate. Like, can we train on this data that is not clear on copyright? And I'll be saying no, but it's like every other model does it. Yeah, and that's the challenge that we face. But I think for the long-term goal, these things will actually become more and more important, because as enterprise adoption increase, there's a lot more questions about what is the underlying data, what's the legality, and at some point, right, the thresholds will need to be met, and we might need to figure out the answer. And for us, we believe that it is possible to build and scale it's probably at a slower pace with clean data.
Yeah. Any other thoughts and follow-ups?
Yeah. I would say let's be careful to not overly see the world today as it will be tomorrow and the next day. We are living in a world where big models rule. That won't be the case a few years from now. Like Eugene's saying, like Vincent has implied, that the world will get smaller, tighter, more purpose-built, right? And with that, the data lineage will be more transparent. Again, the big black box of your favorite super large language model, it's impossible for the human brain to fathom, let alone to regulate in a way that some jurisdiction will get comfortable with. But you break it down into a small thing. So a fleet of small models, think agents, agentic AI, and piecing together the answer versus saying there's a big brain in the sky. I believe that that's a much more trustworthy world, world that we can get our heads around. We can start targeting more local for cultures, for languages, for regional laws, etc. We live in a world of big AI right now, and it's a cool place to be. It's like a parlor trick. Oh, could it do this? Very interesting. But as Mark said, this is not acceptable to most businesses. Most of the world's data is sitting behind corporate firewalls, as it should be, because that's private data that shouldn't be there, right? So you're not going to go training these big models. You're not going to, I hope, melt the polar ice caps by trying to process all of those models all of the time, every year, every month when new data is available. It's not fathomable. It's not trackable. So smaller models, tighter, that are transparent, energy efficient, domain experts, whether they're public domains or behind firewall domains. I think that's a happy world we can kind of strive toward, and you can't do it without the openness, the governance, et cetera, that we've talked about, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, well said. I don't know if we have any questions in the chat, but folks, if you have anything, please share your questions. While we're waiting for Anni to come in, I will say we have a few minutes left. I'd like to maybe have some concluding kind of remarks about how how folks can get started and leverage this opportunity, and what's the first thing that that a leader really needs to understand to leverage this catalyst for taking advantage of this general purpose technology? What are you going to tell people to get started and get involved? Let's start with Eugene.
Yeah, I still, every time, because I'm living right now in SF, and which is in the entire AI bubble, and I constantly fly back twice or three times a year back to Singapore and Malaysia, and I'm constantly reminded that most people are not using or not aware of AI, or they're using it at best as a Google search replacement when they feel like it. And so the lowest hanging fruit is really still just whether you want to use the open source one, like you open up like LM Studio or Llama, load an existing open source model. If you're not English speaking, maybe try our RWKV model. If you're English speaking, you can go ahead and download the Llama models and try to find use cases where you can start using these models in productive ways. Small use cases, like for example, draft an email, summarize your notes, things like that. And once you start finding those, then you can start using in increasingly more productive use cases. I think a lot of people try to jump into the biggest, most complex use case and then see the model fail, and it's like, okay, the technology is not ready now. But there is a lot of productivity gains in even the smaller ones, and that's something that even students, actually, for example, students are the ones that have been adopting AI the most, because they've been like, hey, I can use this to draft answers, I can use this to summarize my notes, or explain things to me, and because they don't have the preconceived notion of like things must be a certain way. And so everyone needs to like just start doing these experiments for themselves, for them to get a sense. And then once you do that, you're going to find yourself using it in your workplace, and then it just amplifies from there.
Yeah, I think you piggyback on that very quickly. I think students and C-level, they share that kind of weakness. Sometimes they do use AI or any new technology, and they don't use it properly. I get a sense, get into the way. So my advice is start with strategy. Whether you're working as a country level and doing your industrial policy, or whether you're the CEO or strategist at company, what are your business outcomes? What are you trying to achieve? Don't get stuck into the noise of AI, blockchain, cloud, and so forth, because these, at the end of the day, these are means to an end, nothing more.
There is one question I'll address, and that's this idea of is a universal protocol from Anni. Are there universal protocols that the open source community could collaboratively develop to support creating sovereign AI to facilitate this? Good question, Anni.
Maybe I can take a stab at this. I personally think the universal protocol at the platform layer already exists. This is very much the open source technology we've been using for the past years or so to build cloud platform. And thankfully, because they are open source, you can now use them to build your private cloud infrastructure very easily. Projects like OpenStack, Kubernetes. There's a very, very successful project in the past 2 years or so called KubeVirt, which basically provides virtualization capability on top of Kubernetes. It really allows you to provide virtual machine on demand with an hypervisor on cloud native technology, so totally distributed. All of this is open source. So you can actually build your infrastructure, your platform as a service, providing access to AI resources, very much on a full end-to-end open source stack. So that's the good news. What is missing is the higher level, I would say, orchestration and standard in the space of, so we talked about earlier that AI becoming kind of smaller, more constrained process, definitely going to happen. But in the context of agentic AI, you need to have protocol of interaction.
Yeah.
So we see the emergence of standard like model context protocol right now with the industry is starting to adopt to define how an AI agent could talk to each other in a kind of standardized and secure manner. Yeah. So coming.
Vincent, I would add to that, when you get to the application stack of the protocol layers, I would say projects like LangChain have kind of help you kind of traverse the Rosetta Stone, like it acts as a Rosetta Stone to interpret, to allow you to plug and play, in this case, large language models or other models, without having to know all the nuances of how to communicate with them. Because if I have to know, oh, when I communicate with this model, I need to structure my communication this way or that, and that kind of LangChain kind of makes it go away. So I think tools like that, the emergence of tools like that, make AI much more accessible and plug and play. And geez, this is not a time to get locked in. Like, this is not you want to date AI, you don't want to marry AI yet, because it's going to be changing. So any protocol that's going to buffer you is going to be really important, so that you're not, kind of stuck with a piece of code that is hardwired to some technology of today. So I think LangChain, it may not be perfect, but it's an example at the application level to insulate you from all of the various wonderful changes that are happening on, the specific technologies.
I can add specifically regarding open source contribution. It's essentially not much different from most existing open source project. So be it RWKV, be it Linux under Linux Foundation, be it PyTorch, and etc. At the end of the day, most of us, our source of truth is still the Git repo. Be it for the code, be it for the model weights, which has this new set of challenges because the assets are now much bigger, but technically all the Hugging Face uploads is a Git repo. And this has been the means of collaborating, sharing, and coordinating on top of your existing chat application, which interestingly, I know Linux Foundation like to use their mailing list, but somehow the whole AI community prefers using Discord, and that becomes the means of collaboration. I don't like Discord, but I have to live with it. so if you view it from that lens, right, it's actually not that much different. And you can play an active role because there are things that are like everyone likes to think of the AI project as like one big thing, but it is like any other project can be broken down into smaller parts. Like, for example, for the RWKV, we have a small, somewhat core team working on the next architecture iteration. We iterate 4 versions of our architectures in 2 years, and we expect this pace to even accelerate because of how we realize there's new ways we can do experiments faster. But architecture for the model is one thing. After we finalize the architecture, someone needs to train it. So data sets need to be prepared. We have members who are trying to get data from multiple languages, increasing capacity. And this is a very boring, simple task, but needs to be multiplied because it's a lot of grudgery of hey, does this data looks right? Why is the indentation for the text here wrong? Is that kind of task that needs to be resolved. And standard open source projects like maintaining the inference code, maintaining documentation, engaging the community. These are things that people can do to just support one open source project, and then subsequently maintaining that communication between the various open source projects for them to be able to co-promote each other. That is how you also promote the collaboration. So it's really not that much different. It's just the barrier of entry is, hey, you kind of need a GPU, and not everyone can say, I have a GPU that can run these things at my home. For example, that is the unfortunate part. It's there is a barrier of entry, but even then, this has been slightly relaxed because, for example, one of the channels I run on RWKV is RWKVX there. Anyone can propose an idea, and one of the project members may pick up the idea, test it, and then run it. And that's actually how we iterate our model architecture version. It's just really like if you read our papers, it's as if we proposed an idea, we had a hypothesis, and then we implemented the code, and then we published a paper. The reality is, some various folks through various ideas, we ran the code. Oh, it worked. Why? And then we've kind of figured out, understand, but because of ways the academic rigors, they want to structure it in the other way, we end up writing it the other way. So but that is actually a lot more true to the open source nature. Anyone can contribute, even if it's the idea, and then subsequently someone on the compute can implement it and run it. And if it wins, it might be our next version of RWKV.
Awesome.
I mean, yeah, open source was born in a university context, right? At the end of the day, these are where we draw the roots. So I think Eugene described very well the scientific method, and that's centuries proven of innovation, invention. That's how we get there.
Excellent. Well, we're 5 minutes over. I do want to give everybody one last opportunity for encouraging folks to get involved. One 10, 20, 30-second statement from each of you. How can we in open source encourage more collaboration to accelerate sovereign AI? Jerry, let's start with you.
Yeah, you got to be in it to win it, is the way I feel. It's hard to sit on the sidelines or read books about fitness to get in shape. You got to actually go do the exercise. So I encourage everyone to get in, check out the Linux Foundation page, go to Hugging Face, and get yourself signed up and explore. And then the questions will come faster for you when you're involved. So get in shape is my first thing.
Vincent?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I just like to add that you can also get involved as an engineer. And, I keep, I sound like a broken record, but I keep telling my engineers that you just getting involved in an open source AI project where you'll have probably a 10 times faster learning curve and, paying for a master's degree or going for a full education on it. You learn very fast in the open source community as an engineer, if that's what you are after. Right? So don't hesitate. Go and select a project that helps you solve a problem that you have. So don't do it just for the sake of being in a community project, right? I think that's the other angle that I really kind of strongly suggest. Select a technology that helps you solve a problem that you currently have, because you will also pick up much faster in this context.
Good advice. Mark?
Academia, enterprise collaboration with startups, accelerate innovations, get those bright ideas down to in production, so it can actually create some real value down the line.
Great. Public-private academic partnerships. And Eugene, the final word?
Just build, don't be afraid to fail, because you are going to learn and try again.
Nice, great advice. Chop the wood, carry the water, skill up. Please, everybody, I want to thank you so much for your time and incredible insights. I'd encourage everybody to get involved in our communities, take advantage of our free resources, our training and certification programs offered by LF Education, a whole host of research offered by Linux Foundation Research. If you have any questions, get involved. Email us at research@linuxfoundation.org, and we'll be more than happy to point you to the projects and the people who can assist in your journey to sovereign AI. Thank you so much, everybody. I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.